For many years, the Dark Voice 336 has been the go-to tube amp for budget-oriented audiophiles. That's an excellent product. Hybrid tube amps can also be easily found for under $500. Now, xDuoo has their own recent spin on the tube amp landscape, and this is the TA-22, a hybrid transistor tube design. It sells for just under $500. The folks at Apos Audio let me borrow the TA-22 for review. They also sent along a pair of their Apos Ray tubes. Apos is one of few online retailers that specializes in audiophile gear. And unlike the alternatives, Apos also offers a line of their own products, which now includes headphones, cables, and several tubes. Check out Apos Audio if you're itching to buy new gear. xDuoo really did throw everything into the TA-22. It's really hard to see what else they could have added to this beefy product, other than Bluetooth transmission, which nobody else does. The TA-22 uses dual 12 AU7 matched tubes. Apos sent me their own branded 12 AU7 tubes to try, so we will swap the stock later in the video. The TA-22 purportedly has a maximum of 3 watts out of balanced. That's a huge amount of power, plentiful for any headphone, including the Modhouse Argon, the Fostex T50RP, and T60RP, assuming you wire those for balanced. The TA-22 comes with dual ES9038Q2M DAC chipsets. As you know, every year, AKM, ESS, or some other manufacturer releases a new DAC, and all of a sudden, the extremes of the community start talking about how amazing the new DAC is. The 9038 has been around for a while, and it's a very good, neutral, transparent DAC chip. Adding it here to the TA-22 instead of some random Chinese knockoff DAC chip is, I think, a good sign. Although, the nostalgic part of me wishes someone would find a horde of old Burr Brown DAC chips to stuff into products like the TA-22, or better yet, every single DAC. The TA-22 uses good components throughout. The Apos website clearly outlines the principles, including ELNA and Nichicon capacitors. The TA-22 comes with nearly every type of connection you could want: USB, coaxial, optical, and Bluetooth, which, by the way, supports reception codecs up to LDAC. You can use a separate DAC if you want and use the TA-22 as a tube amp alone. For that, the TA-22 has balanced and RCA inputs. Of course, you can bypass the TA-22's tubes altogether and use its 9038 as a standalone DAC, but then you're limited to RCA output. The headphone output section includes balanced XLR and 4.4mm along with single-ended quarter-inch. This amp DAC supports all high-resolution PCM audio, but strangely only DSD-256, because the 9038 can handle up to DSD-512, just not on the TA-22. On the flip side, the TA-22 is also an MQA renderer, for better or worse. As for physical design, the TA-22 is a modern, attractive unit. It's made entirely of metal and has plenty of heft. The rotary knob turns with incremental clicks. The tubes are somewhat protected with detachable covers, though to be honest, these are more for aesthetics than tube safety. This amp has an OLED screen, which is thankfully quite large and easy to read. The display will show connection type, sample rate, filter, and gain. Turning the knob will show a horizontal slider for volume level. Each notch on the knob wheel translates to one level of volume. Compared to my KN-HA1 Mark II, the xDuoo looks far more modern and, in my opinion, more attractive. But the jet black design of my Quad PA1 and the svelte Felix Euphoria or the boxy Woo WA7 2nd Gen are pretty attractive too. Now, the monolith Liquid Platinum has its own unique design. The Jolita Glass FX, on the other hand, is pretty ugly. So, xDuoo's overall design language is still very unique to them, and I think that's a good thing. Overall, the TA-22 has a multitude of features that you won't find in products double or triple the price. I'd be ecstatic if my WA7 had half the features of the TA-22. The TA-22 is really well built. it uses tubes that can be easily replaced through Apos or elsewhere. Now, the one gripe I have is with the large orange TA-22 xDuoo logo on the front panel. It is irritatingly bright and uses a color that is far from soothing. You can cover it with some gaffer's tape, but it really did not need to be as gaudy as it is. I listened to the TA-22 for a couple of weeks. Now, xDuoo suggests you burn in the tubes for about 6 hours. I received my review unit used, so it already had a few hours on the tubes, but I followed the instructions anyway. Generally, burn-in for solid-state components is a joke, but after using tube amps and DACs for a very long time, tube burn-in can be helpful. I've had temperamental new tubes with lots of audible noise, which settle down after several hours of continuous use. You don't have to do it, but if you feel that your tubes are producing more than the pleasant harmonic distortion, a few hours burn-in might be worth a shot. But you can tell a tube is bad, so don't hesitate to return a newly purchased tube if it just isn't playing nicely. Speaking of tube harmonics, it is the harmonic distortion through the tubes which gives the tube amps their characteristic warmth. While there are many 12AU7 tube options, they are not all identical. Chinese tubes may sound different from old stock General Electric or Raytheon. Feel free to experiment, but don't go crazy. There's no need to spend more than you can afford on a pair of tubes. In any event, I listened to a plethora of audio in my time with the TA-22. High-resolution FLAC, low-resolution streaming, Netflix, YouTube, TV shows, movies, all of that good stuff. I used the TA-22 with my Mac and PC. I didn't need to download any additional drivers, and the TA-22 showed up immediately on both computers. I swapped to the Apos tubes and listened with them as well. But honestly, since I don't have two TA-22s to do a real A/B comparison, I'm not even going to bother stumbling through vague explanations of what I heard, whether the stock and Apos tubes make the amp sound different. I don't think that's even possible. What I will say about the Apos tubes is that if you take a close look, they appear very similar. And right out of the box, the Apos tubes work perfectly well with the TA-22, by the way. In fact, I briefly swapped the Apos tubes into my WA7, and once again, they work perfectly well, though I still preferred my WA7 stock tubes. I also conducted an A/B test between the TA-22, WA7, Quad PA1, and the Euphoria connected to the transparent Soundcause LA-QXD1 DAC. Using Voice Meter Banana on PC and multi-output devices on Mac, I sent signal to 2 DAC amps at a time and listened on my switch boxes. I used various headphones, including the HD6XX, Denon D5200, D7200, Sennheiser HD800S, and the ZMF Auteur. I used a decibel meter to match volumes as best as possible. I do not get into the emotional stuff about audio. That's not my thing. If it's yours, that's fine. There are plenty of channels and websites that cater to that kind of thing. I'm also not the measurements is everything type of guy, and once again, if that suits you, good thing you've got an awful lot of similarly minded reviewers. I was not concerned at all about describing ooey gooey sound or talking about slam or silky texture or anything of the sort. All I want to know is whether the TA-22 provides enough harmonic distortion to audibly alter audio. I can generally say whether there seems to be a bit more bass or not, or brighter vocals or not, or less clarity or more clarity compared to some other product. But that's the extent to which I'm willing to go with respect to the TA-22 and all tube amps. Having said all that, my impression of the TA-22 with its stock tubes is that it is a very good amp in its own right. The stock tubes did not produce any audible hiss or static or buzzing, the type of really annoying feedback that badly matched tubes or faulty tubes tend to affect. In fact, to give you an example, I'm still using my PA1 stock tubes. I've had this amp for 5 years and have used it for approximately 1,000 hours or more since then. I don't really keep a log. Its tubes started producing the type of noise I just mentioned about 700 or 800 hours in. Quad suggested that the tubes might need replacing, but I could try to eke out a bit more life by giving the tubes a longer warm-up time. That is, letting the amp sit and warm up longer than usual before using it. And with that trick, the majority of the hiss, crackle, pop, and buzzing diminishes below my ability to hear on the Quad. As tubes age, this sort of thing will happen, but even new tubes can do it. When I had my Dark Voice 336 SE, I purchased a number of new tubes, including several from China. Big mistake. Those Chinese tubes were faulty and no amount of burn-in or warm-up time fixed that. I tell you all of this because when a tube amp does not have this issue with tubes, you don't think about it. But when it does, all you do is think about it. Luckily, in my experience with the TA-22, the stock tubes work perfectly well. But that's not to say that the TA-22 sounds like a traditional OTL tube amp. I'm not convinced that it does. Compared to my Quad PA-1 and Euphoria, I did hear a difference in harmonic distortion, or the warmth. This concept is not really all that easy to explain, and you kind of have to hear it. But beyond the harmonic distortion, the Quad also produced harder, more impactful mid-bass. Drum strikes always sounded sharper on the Quad, while the TA-22 rendered drums pushed slightly back and not quite as clear. The Euphoria did not have the seemingly bass emphasis of the Quad, but had more clarity overall, clearer than the Quad and the TA-22. On the other hand, the vocals on the TA-22 never sounded harsh, even with tracks that have sibilants recorded into them. The Quad always seemed to have a bit more sharpness to female artists whenever sibilance was present. The Euphoria had the most neutral rendition in this respect. Treble on the TA-22 appeared to have a fairly neutral upper treble, but a dip in the low treble. Of course, the Euphoria sounded clearer in treble and didn't seem to have that dip, and the Quad exhibited a slight emphasis in mid-treble. Now, the WA7. Look, I have talked about this tube amp many times over the years. It's one of my favorites, and the reason I think is pretty simple. The WA7's design and stock tubes produce a slight bass emphasis and a smooth mid and low treble. I just cannot get the WA7 to sound harsh no matter what awfully mixed track I throw at it. But then again, the WA7 isn't particularly clear. Compared to the WA7, the TA-22 has slightly closer to neutral bass, ever so slightly more clarity in the mids, and similar though not exactly the same treble. But remember, I said a little while ago that the effect of tube amps is their warmth, which is through harmonic distortion. True tube amps such as the Dark Voice, Euphoria, Quad, WA7 had an audible difference in, well, harmonic distortion leading to the perception of warmth. But the TA-22 really did not. I've talked about this before, years ago. Solid-state and tube hybrid amps really do not do a lot to separate themselves from the typical solid-state amp. In other words, I have yet to hear a tube hybrid amp that actually sounds like a true tube OTL. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think the TA-22 is a very well-designed amp, but I doubt it's got the right solution to somebody's OTL itch. When I dropped the Apos tubes into the TA-22, I did not hear any appreciable difference. It wasn't as if the Apos tubes miraculously changed what I had just minutes before heard with the stock tubes. Short-term memory for sound being as useless as it is, I'm not going to pretend this was an unimpeachable conclusion, but that was just my impression. When I compared the Apos tubes in the TA-22 against the other amps I mentioned, I again did not hear anything different from what I experienced whilst using the stock tubes on the TA-22. But hey, the Apos tubes are perfectly good, just like the stock ones which come with the amp. Having said all of this, I think that the TA-22 is a great option. xDuoo crammed a lot into this device, and that is its saving grace. Plentiful power, solid build quality, large and useful display, connectivity for days, and some tubes thrown in for extra measure, all for under $500. That's worth it, I think, if you're looking for an all-in-one solution that happens to offer tube implementation. Remember, you don't have to spend this kind of money to be an audiophile. You should enjoy your music with whatever makes you happy.